Joseph, welcome.
Hi, great to be with you.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you on our show. We have been huge fans of one of your books that we read a few years ago, Crucial Conversations, and it's a big part of our book. Like, we've quoted so much stuff in that in our book and in our teachings, and and what's funny about it, because you're mostly a business researcher, correct?
Yep.
And Crucial Conversations is essentially a business book.
Yeah.
Well, we have been touting it as the best relationship communications book, as well as the best parenting book that we think we've ever read.
Well, and honestly, that was our subterfuge. We figured if we could get into people's minds and hearts through the business context, that we could probably bless families and homes as well. And so the scheme is paying off.
Yeah.
You're the evidence of it. Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely are the evidence of it.
I think I didn't, on your website, you highlight the 4 books, and I know there's a bunch of things around it, but I mean, you could almost rework it as Crucial Parenting and then, Crucial
Marriage communication.
Yeah, something.
No doubt. I've had so many experiences where I'll go, I went to talk to the top 300 managers at a pharmaceutical company one time, and the HR people in advance were saying, don't use personal examples because the CEO and all the executives, they'll think that's inappropriate and they don't talk about that stuff in the workplace. And I tried to explain to them, you know what, they're human beings too. They got marriages, they got kids, and yeah. Sure enough, as always happens, on the very first break, the CEO goes, come here. And he calls me over and he goes, hey, this is going great, but can you help me with my teenager?
Yeah.
And that's what we're all thinking about.
Yeah, exactly.
It definitely is. And I'm wondering, when you went into doing that, well, it's funny, I just want to tell you, I think when I read that, I'm a very business oriented woman, and talking about feelings and how you deal with feelings and communication and all those kind of softer skills was difficult for me. I wasn't raised that way, and it certainly wasn't how I did business back in the day. And
well, just to highlight that, she did business in Salt Lake, and so there's a little bit more of a, I don't know, masculine type, in the corporate world in Utah. So
I think I was the only woman one of the only women in our building who wasn't an administrative assistant. So it was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
But I think because this was written like a business book, I could hear it. I wasn't going to open like the warm and fuzzy, lovey-dovey communications books. This really spoke to me.
And she was relearning how to communicate too, because the way that she got stuff done in that environment was to scream at people and cuss a lot.
Yeah, that was the code of the road in the 80s, 70s, 60s. That was how we were all trained. And that, that was why we called the book Crucial Conversations. It wasn't because we wanted people necessarily to improve communication for its own sake. It's because our research again and again showed that your company suffers when people can't talk about emotionally and politically risky things. And we're able to document over and over again how many kinds of outcomes are affected by that one little dynamic. Now, you two know about what happens at home when you can't talk about those things as well. But that's what brought us to this idea in the workplace.
It's brilliant. Can you talk for our listeners who maybe aren't very familiar with Crucial Conversations, some of your biggest ahas and the things that, again, we're tilted towards the marriage side, since that's really what we're, all about, and what we parenting.
We probably read more books on parenting than we did about relationships.
It's true. And none of them worked with our children. It would work for
the child. Yeah.
It was like these they were teaching you like ways to trick them or manipulate them, right? I mean, in my opinion. So it would work for it'd work for a little bit until our smart children figured it out, and then they were like, yeah, I'm not having this anymore.
But just learning that one trick about safety in a conversation was kind of a game changer, at least with our son.
Yeah. So will you tell us and our audience, and maybe tilt it towards the parenting marriage side of things, although I think it applies everywhere, some of your favorite concepts from Crucial Conversations, and then also from your other books?
Sure. Yeah, and the first obviously is just the notion that conversations are crucial. So it's the title of the book is probably its most important message, that how you show up in these moments has effects far beyond the immediate moment. And you know that with your kids, I know it with mine. They remember some of those conversations. If there are ones you handled badly, they can violate trust. They can create resistance and resentment for years to come. And you know they're going to be sitting in therapy one day because you had one bad day. And
Yeah.
and
We're
doesn't mean we
living that.
have to be perfect. Yeah, yeah.
We're living that. We're constantly trying to unwind things that we wound up when they were children just because we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't have the right tools or.
Even the
don't.
things we think we did right, they remember differently.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? Which, you know, that's the other part of this is realizing that it's about getting to dialogue. It's not about monologue. And I think a lot of the parenting books that we read are about how do I get them to do what I want? And how do I get something across, rather than realizing, no, there's a pool of shared meaning, and the quality of a relationship depends on the size of that pool. And that pool has to be contributed to, not just by you. It's not just you downloading all of the stuff that you think needs to be in their heads. They're having their own experiences. They're having their own lives. And you've got to enter that conversation realizing it's a conversation. It's two people. It's a connection. And so I think that mindset coming to it makes all the difference in the world. And then finally, I think, you know, there's a lot more we could talk about, but I'd say the third is this notion of starting with heart. I think the biggest mistakes I made as a parent began with my motive, not with my behavior. It began by me coming in wanting to fix them, to be right, to compel, to control, there was some insidious motive under the surface, sometimes outside of my own awareness. It's not that I'm a bad guy. It's that that's the model I've seen, or that's all I had available at the time. But I'd come in that way, and learning to be conscious of asking questions like, what am I acting like I want right now? To me, that's one of the most profound self-awareness provoking questions that I've ever learned. What am I acting like I want right now? That has helped me humble myself, take a step back, and approach my children differently more than most any other intervention.
Do you have any examples of that, either with your children or with your wife, that you can share with us that will further highlight what you mean by that?
Yeah, hundreds of them. How many do you want?
Give us two of your favorites.
Two good ones.
I'll give you one with one of my sons, with Samuel. I was one day sitting in the living room reading a book. He came walking in with his math book, and he said, "Dad, can you help me with my homework?" And I thought, terrific. I've been preparing for this my whole life, right? Math never did me any good in my career, but now it will. And so I sat next to him and started helping him. And soon into my tutoring, he starts making these little noises of disgust. You know, he's going like that. And I was picking up on it. And it was starting to affect me. And finally he goes, "Dad, you're doing it wrong." And instantly I said, "No, I'm not. I'm doing it right." Now, you can already hear it, right? The two of you already know what's going wrong here. Now, I think I'm correcting him about math, but there's something else going on inside of me. My motive shifted. So 15 seconds ago, my motive was to help my son with his math and have a little connecting father-son time. But 15 seconds later, all of a sudden, it's something much darker than that. I'm now about trying to be right, trying to win, but I'm not conscious of this. Right. My son, of course, picks it up, and so he puts up with me for a little while longer, and finally he goes, "Dad, can I just leave?" And I said, "Yeah, take your book with you." Well, you can hear it now.
Yeah.
Now it's not just me trying to be right. My motive has gotten way worse. Now it's about punishing. I'm trying to get a little dig in as he's walking out of the room. All this ugliness is going on, and I'm not conscious of what's happening, because that's the nature of crucial conversations. Our brains don't process as well in these moments. So he walks out. Meanwhile, my wife walks in. She sits down, and earlier he had asked me to give him a ride to his karate lesson, because he likes it when I hang around and comment on what he's doing. Well, now he walks back in the room. My wife is sitting here. She didn't see this previous interaction. And he says, "Mom, will you give me a ride to karate?" He's trying
now he's playing your game.
Yeah, he's lowered to my level. And of course, Sela doesn't know what's going on. And so she says, "Yeah, of course." And he starts to walk out. And so now in my best, most hypocritical parent style, I said, "Samuel, hey, come back in here." I said, "Sit down on that chair there." I said, "If you got some issue with me, you can come and talk to me about it. You don't come in here and play games like this with Mom. Look at this. This is just awful. I mean, this is embarrassing for me to admit that I got to this point.
But you want to know something crazy? There are people listening to this going, yeah, that's exactly what I would have said. And that's exactly what I would have done. And they're going, what's wrong with this? So please continue.
Yes. So remember the principle. The principle is the problems begin not with your behavior, but with your motive. So the thing you got to fix in this moment is not something that you need a technique book about. It's not having some script for the perfect parenting response. It's you taking a look at yourself. And so as I sat there and I saw this stony look on his face, I asked myself the question, what am I acting like I want? And boy, if you're willing to ask yourself that question and hear the answer, first of all, the answer comes unbidden in seconds. This doesn't take complex analysis. You know the answer. And almost instantly, the answer that came to me was, I'm acting like I want to hurt my little boy. That's a stab to the heart. Now, here's the wonderful thing. Most of us are pretty decent human beings at our core. We are. And so all it takes for you to change your motives to something better is just to know what your current motive is. Awareness is enough. And you'll find yourself repulsed at what you're pursuing in the moment. And so as soon as that answer came into my mind, as soon as I knew I'm acting like I want to control and hurt and punish my little boy, I didn't want it anymore. And then you ask the second question. The second question is, what do I really want? What do I really want? And instantly, it took a second for the answer to come. And that was, I want Samuel to feel toward me the way he did 10 minutes ago. That's what I want. And you know what happened? My mouth opened. I didn't have to force it to open. It opened all on its own. And the words that came out were, I'm sorry, Samuel. I said, I'm sorry. I said, I wasn't able to help you with your homework. I wish I could have. But then after that, I've been abusing my position as your dad to punish you. And I'm sorry. Would you please forgive me? He said, yeah. Can I leave now?
Of course he did.
Oftentimes, what it takes for somebody else's motives to change are for us to stop giving them evidence that they need those motives. Mm-hmm. He thought he wasn't safe with me. So he thought he needed to present this stony front and to be sticking me back the way I was sticking him. I said, yeah, of course, Samuel. And he started to walk down the hall. He got halfway down the hall. And he didn't turn around. He said to the back door, he said, Dad, would you give me a ride to karate? And everything shifted. I came, I put my arm around him. I took him to karate. We had a wonderful evening together. But it all begins when the motive changes. It isn't about techniques and skills first, because behavior follows motive. It's about being willing to ask yourself, what am I acting like I want? And then connect with the higher part of you. And that's 80% of the problem.
Yeah. Well, it's taking it personally. I mean, what's kind of funny is I can hear a teeny bit of tremor in your voice, just like recounting that. And I don't know how many times you recounted it. I'll bet it's been a lot, but it's still heart tugging to think about it that way. But I, like to Sam's point earlier, it makes perfect sense to me. It's like he needs to recognize that I'm here trying to help him and he's being a jerk.
Yeah.
And that's where I would have gone, probably.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny how we think we need to be in how I don't know, when I was early, when the kids were young, I really thought I needed to be in control. I needed to teach them things. And what's funny is they're learning things themselves and they're in full control themselves. You have no control anyway. Right. Yeah. So recognizing that and then being able to recognize that you have the power to change that, again, by just having some awareness about your motives and also how you're currently feeling and how Absolutely. Your brain doesn't do very well when you're feeling angry. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. The whole idea of crucial conversations, the irony of them is that when it matters most, we do our worst. So I've seen the profile of your listeners, the folks that are part of your community, and these are obviously very bright, well-trained, successful people. And so all of us come into these moments thinking that we've got this cognitive capacity and we can handle stuff. But the problem is that when we face moments of interpersonal threat, our bodies respond the same way they would if we were facing physical threat. There's enormous physiological evidence for this. And what happens is your blood flow gets redirected. So the large muscle groups of your legs and arms get engorged with blood. Now, why would you need that for a conversation? You don't, but that's what's happening in your body. And it all happens because a tiny little bit of a chemical called adrenaline starts to course through your blood. And that causes these things to happen involuntarily. Now, the upshot of this is you have a finite amount of blood in your body. So it has to come from somewhere. So your body decides which organs it doesn't need to give as much blood to. And guess which one of them is?
Your brain.
It's the brain. But fortunately, only the higher reasoning centers are affected, right? All of the survival parts of the brain are being very well served and they're turned on at full capacity. But the prefrontal cortex, your reasoning powers, that's why in that moment with Samuel, I'm thinking, this is good stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Right now, this makes sense. He's going to get it soon. He's going to apologize. Everything's going to be great. It's because I'm an absolute moron in that moment.
Yeah.
So for your listeners, I mean, give yourself a little bit of a break. If you've ever behaved like an idiot during a crucial conversation, it's because you were one.
Yeah.
And it's a temporary condition, but we literally are operating with reduced cognitive capacity. So when you're yelling at each other as a couple and everybody can see that your relationship is melting down in the moment and everybody else knows what the right answer is except you two in that moment. When that's happening, it's because that's all you've got, fight or flight. That's all you've got available. So the first problem you've got to solve in your crucial conversations is how do you turn your brain back on?
Yeah. I think,
And how do you do that? Oh, sorry, baby. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say one of the questions that, and I don't ask myself this often enough, but you asked yourself two questions when you were dealing with Samuel is when you recognize that the other person is getting defensive, which means that they don't feel safe. So if a person that you're having a conversation with doesn't feel safe, then it's your fault. It's like, why don't they feel safe right now? What did I done to make them not feel safe? So that's a good one for me anyway, as far as turning it back inside.
I'll give you a corollary to that. Oftentimes, all you have to do to make somebody feel unsafe is nothing. And so just not responding to their obvious needs or conditions or something like that's all you need. So here's the deal. Your brain has two problems to solve. Part of your brain, its only problem is just to keep you alive. That's all it needs to do. And then it considers it a successful day. The rest of your hardware is available for you to say, how do I have a creative, happy, productive life and all of that stuff? But that's optional. And so when there's a fight between those two parts of the brain, guess which part wins?
Always.
The survival part always wins. It has power to press a shut-off switch for the other part. The other part can't shut it off. It can shut the other part off. And so it's always going to win. And here's what happens. So I've got this little exercise I do. It's really fascinating. I've got a series of like 30 pictures I'll show to a group of 100 people. And they're going to come up in about a half a second each. And I'll say, all right, I want you to watch this series of 30 pictures. Turn to your partner, and I want you to recall all the pictures you can. Some of the pictures are a wicker chair, a ball of yarn, a jump rope, just innocuous kinds of things. Some of the pictures are daggers and hand grenades and barbed wire and rattlesnakes, but they're all mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are watching these pictures, flash, 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 flash. And then I say, okay, now turn to your partner and name all the pictures. So there's 15 of each, 15 of the danger pictures, 15 of the normal boring pictures. Guess which ones they remember more of?
Danger.
The danger.
Yeah. They'll remember about 80% of the danger pictures and about 20% of the other pictures. Now, nobody prompted them to do this, but it's because you have two different brains that are paying attention. One of them is saying survival threat, survival threat, survival threat. And anytime you enter a crucial conversation, that part of your brain is hyper alert for any signal that says you're an enemy. And as I said earlier, all you need to do to say you're an enemy is nothing. If you sit there stoic in a conversation, nodding your head while somebody's talking about something emotionally significant, they think you're an enemy. So this whole notion, Patrick, as you're saying about making it safe, you have to be generating affirmative evidence all the time that says I'm not an enemy. Now, here's the mistake you and I make. We tend to think that the way you help somebody know you're not an enemy is to sugarcoat your message. We think that understating our real concerns and our real feedback is the way you show the other person I'm not a threat to you. That's exactly wrong. These are two completely different problems to solve. The problem of saying, I'm not your enemy, and the problem of saying, and here's what I think and here's how I feel, are two separate problems. And once you learn that's the case, your life changes, because you start realizing I can be 100% honest with people as long as they're 100% safe with me. And so you have to learn how to solve those two problems. And that's it. That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
So talk about creating safety. Let's go back to the monkey mind a little bit, or I don't know, whatever one term you like for that, you know, the survival mode. What in a conversation you realize that survival mode's happening to you? What's the tech? I mean, I know the answer, but I want you to tell everybody that you, what things do you do to try to get out of that survival mode so that you're able to cognitively think about what's happening in the conversation? I think we've already talked about it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're asking if I'm feeling it, how do I help me?
Yes.
That's problem one. Problem two is if the other person's feeling it, how do I help them?
Yes.
That's a different problem. So with me, one of the skills is the one we just reviewed. So if your brain is shutting down, the question is, how do you tell your body to turn it back on? One of the best ways to reinvigorate your brain is to give it a problem to solve that it isn't capable of solving. So if you give it a complex, abstract question to answer, the primal brain, the monkey brain you're talking about, it doesn't know how to handle those problems. Like, what am I acting like I want right now?
Mm-hmm.
Problems that require self-awareness and self-reflection. That's not something a lizard knows how to do. And so as soon as you give that question, what happens is your brain starts to realize, oh, this isn't a physical threat. This is a complex interpersonal problem. And slowly blood starts to return to the brain. When you follow that with a question like, what do I really want? And I encourage people to ask it at 3 levels. What do I want for me? What do I want for you? What do I want for the relationship? As soon as you give it those kinds of abstract problems, your blood pressure drops, your heart rate slows, blood starts to get reinfused into the brain because you're telling your body it needs to do something different than what it thought it was supposed to do. So that's a powerful way to do that. Now, sometimes a timeout is important too. Now, the timeout needs to be not F you, I'm leaving. The timeout needs to be, hey, I need a second to collect myself. This is an important conversation to me. Having a script like that available that just says, I'm going to take responsibility to come back in just a couple of minutes, but let me go just kind of collect myself for a second here. That's often a very important intervention. But that can be accelerated. Sometimes a timeout doesn't help because you're going out and you're ruminating over all the reasons this person's a dirtbag and all the ways you're going to make their life a living hell. And so that's not helpful. So just a timeout doesn't matter. It's what you do during the timeout that matters. And these questions like, what do I really want? What am I acting like I want? Those are useful therapy.
Yeah. Self-reflection as opposed to reflecting about why that person's doing such bad things to you.
Yeah, plotting doesn't help.
I do that all the time. I go out and I reflect. What do I really want? I want Sam to recognize how big of a jerk she's being.
Let me know how that works out.
I'm just kidding.
No, but sometimes that is the answer, right? Until you can get to a better answer. Again, you're looking for that higher self answer, not
exactly.
not my mini me.
Yeah, I'll use that if that's okay to jump to mastermind stories. I think for couples and for parents, the most powerful chapter in the book is one we call Mastermind Stories. And the most critical insight of that entire chapter is just us becoming intellectually persuaded and intellectually convinced that all of our emotions are a product of our own stories, not other people's behavior. 100%. 100%.
Amen.
And as soon as you accept that truth, then when you leave the room, as you were acknowledging, Pat, and I do the same thing, as you're out there rehearsing your story over and over and over in your mind, at least you've got a crowbar available to stick into the middle of that story and start prying it open and realizing how it's your own invention and that you're creating your own problem. Oh my gosh, that's the most liberating thing in the world.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that.
It is. It's sometimes hard in the moment, like until you can get your brain working to get there. Like these are not easy. You know, you're making it sound so easy, but these are hard. Like I know them all. I practice them all, but I still fail.
Yeah.
I still have times where I'm like, damn, I blew that. I totally blew that conversation still.
I think we read Crucial Conversations maybe 6 or 7 years ago. it was, but I know that the first time we've done 3 or 4 couples retreats, and we were in Mexico, and there were 12 couples, and the 2 books that we gave them were 5 Love Languages and Crucial Conversations.
Mm.
But so speaking of relationships,
Well, hang on. I wanted to go back just.
no, it's my turn.
Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm kidding.
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to creating safety. We talked about what you do for yourself to get yourself back into a conversation so that it's going to be productive. But what is it that you think you do to create safety? Because I
Yeah.
struggle with that. I sometimes do a great job, and sometimes I can't seem to quite get there.
Especially when people are hyper defensive.
Yeah, when they're really angry and
Yeah. Yeah. No question.
Patrick's raising his hand when he's
yeah, and essentially what's happening is they're behaving in ways that I learned to code as threats. The truth is they're not feeling safe. That's the truth of that moment. And so that's the problem with stories. So you're asking, Sam, how do you help yourself to feel safe? I think the master insight is that nobody else is responsible for our safety. We are.
right.
As adults, we are almost never under any threat other than of our own invention. Now, if somebody is armed and dangerous, that's different. If there's a physical threat, that's one thing. Or if you have somebody who has control over your career and could do something damaging, there are moments like that, but they are far fewer than you and I like to imagine. And so one of the most self-soothing things we can recite to ourselves is that I am 100% responsible for my safety, not them. They aren't threatening me right now. I am. I'm taking the behavior that I see and I'm coding that as threat, when in fact it's not. It's them being scared, them being defensive. So I'll tell you one of the other big insights in our research for Crucial Conversations. We spent thousands of hours watching asymmetric conversations where there was a power asymmetry. So a moment where somebody with less power in an organization, relatively less, was trying to give extremely difficult feedback to somebody with more power who also had a track record of defensiveness. So these were the ideal acid tests for Crucial Conversation skills. And one of the most important insights I learned from these people who were so skillful at doing that was they learned to realize, oh, that boss is behaving that way. This powerful person is behaving that way because they feel unsafe. You and I tend to think that they're just enjoying their power, and that when they become autocratic or even abusive, that it's them celebrating their capacity to do violence to other human beings. Now, there are sociopaths in the world, but again, far fewer than we like to think.
Few and far between.
Yeah. And the only evidence you need to prove that to yourself is to ask yourself, have you been in a position of power where you've abused it? Well, I can go back to sitting there with my son, Samuel. Bingo, right there. Am I a sociopath? I hope not. But that's exactly what I did in that moment. That's what I did. I had more power. I could get away with doing crap to him, and so I did. And so that gives us a little bit more grace and forgiveness for people to say, all right, that is what's going on here is not sociopathy. What's not going on here is Hannibal Lecter, right? What's probably going on here is they're feeling threatened and they have enough power that they can use this as a mask for it.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you realize that, you become the most powerful person in the room, because you know what that person needs. All they need is safety, and you can offer that to them.
How do you do that?
You can offer it as a peer, not a supplicant. Well, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So I was in a moment of disagreement, extremely crucial conversation with one of the most powerful CEOs I've ever worked with, Fortune 50 company. And he brought me in basically to tell me that all the planning we'd done in the previous months, that he wanted to throw it aside and he wanted to just cut to the chase with something. And it was a huge violation of our plans. And he gave it in this matter-of-fact, authoritarian way, no openness to dialogue. It was a violation. And I sat there kind of thinking, gosh, I don't want to lose this client. I don't want to lose this project. I don't want to, all of this defensive kind of stuff was going on in my head. And I thought, gosh, this is that moment. This moment will set a precedent for how we're going to engage in disagreements for the next 5 years if we end up working on this together. So I decided I was jumping into the middle of this. So I'm going to call him Bob. So I said, hey, Bob, I said, I get it that you're the boss here. That caught him off guard. My acknowledgement that there was a power differential and that I respected that. was kind of big to him. And he got this kind of uncomfortable smile on his face, and he sat back in his chair. And I said, I also get it that you want us to kind of set aside a lot of what we've planned and jump into some action here. I get that. And at the end of the day, this is your decision to make, and I'll support it if that's what you decide to do. You're the boss. He kind of nodded his head. And then I said, and if you believe that I'm only loading up this project because I want to extract a bunch more consulting fees for things that aren't adding value, that was a guess I was taking, that that's where some of this was coming from. And he crossed his arm and he got this really uncomfortable look on his face. And I thought, bingo, there it is. You know, that was it. But the other thing that was happening was he was starting to realize two things. Number one, I cared about his problems. And number one, I respected him. Those are the ingredients of safety. People feel safe with you when they know two things. Number one, you care about their problems, interests, and concerns almost as much as they do. And when you can articulate them as well or better than they can, they do this. They go, ah, and they heave a sigh of relief. And secondly, they have to know you care about and respect them personally. And when they do that, they relax and they begin to engage, and then they can start to hear you. When they don't believe those two things, they can't hear you, and they won't hear any argument you need to make. He started to nod, and I said, but Bob, I have some reason to believe that if we cut out most of what you've asked us to cut out, we'll pay for it later. I'd like to make that argument with you. But if you don't want to hear that argument, we'll set it aside. If you do, then I'll make it for you right now. What would you like me to do? Well, of course, he said, yeah, make the argument. Now, the important thing that happened in that moment too, one of the best ways to create safety for somebody in a position of power is to ask permission. Mm-hmm. That's your way of just kind of tipping your hat to the title, to the position, to the authority they've got. Now, it wasn't me cowing. It wasn't me cowering. It was me just acknowledging the decision structure that we had here. He said, yes, I made my argument. At the end, he was persuaded. We went back to the original plan, but that wasn't the most important outcome of that conversation. The most important outcome was he learned he was safe with me. Right. And he learned that when there was something uncomfortable to discuss, that I was going to give him enough safety that he could admit that that was a concern. So there's an example for you of how powerful and potent we can be in those moments and reach a completely different outcome that also strengthens the relationship.
You know, it's funny how you're saying that it's in a, asymmetrical power situation that you ask for permission. But I found that even if you are the powerful one, asking someone else permission creates safety.
Absolutely.
Or in something where you view yourselves to be of the same power level, like Patty and I, it's not, no one's authoritative over the other. We're partners. We're equal partners. But so asking for permission, I don't know. That's been my experience. I probably don't do it often enough, huh?
No, well, it's just like everything. We're still learning.
Yeah.
That's why we're not so perfect. But so I have a question, because sometimes there's a wild card that comes at play. And I think I recognize this inside myself as much as, like, say, maybe with my son. But sometimes there's situations where you don't feel safe, or you feel more defensive because you've already been beating yourself up. And when somebody else mentions it totally casually, in a very safe way, you go into fight mode. So is there a way if you picked up on any tricks or tips or recognize that in all of your research, that or is that just one of those things you got to kind of dig through?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all of us bring wounds to our crucial conversations. That's universal. And I think the greatest asset is to be conscious of that fact. And when you recognize that they're entering the conversation, to ask for the ability to ask for the permission to be able to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means pulling away. But the greatest show of humility, especially for a son, is my children have grown up too and become adults, and we're able to have conversations where I'm able to acknowledge that I'm a human being struggling my way through what the two of us are trying to address right now. That's given them so much more permission to be a peer in the conversation with me. Mm-hmm. And that's when it gets really good. So again, just being aware of it and being able to call it out when it's happening, and then interrupt the conversation when the real conversation is between me and me, not me and you. Deal with that and then come back to it. That's the best you can do.
Yeah.
There's so much too in here, and also in your TEDx talk, which I loved, by the way. I know you've done two, but I'm talking specifically about the happiness one that I think you did last year, about truth. You know, really being truthful with yourself and then being truthful with others. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's and so we're going to kind of shift gears too, because I want you to talk a little bit about the other side.
Oh, I'd love to. And, you know, the two topics are so related. I think I've learned as much about crucial conversations from the Other Side Academy as I have in all of our prior research. But I think the central personal discovery for me is that all lasting happiness in life is about our capacity for three things: truth, love, and connection.
Boom.
And connection is a product of those previous two. Connection is just the result of truth and love. And I put truth first on purpose, because we often, if you put love first, then it tends to be a weak counterfeit for love, which is just permission. We tend to think that love means allowing people to do whatever they do and never hurting feelings. When in fact, the greatest expression of love is just us being willing to be truthful with each other. And there is no real connection around that. And so that for me is really kind of the distillation of what we've learned about crucial conversations, that the degree of intimacy we ever achieve in our lives is only as great as the degree of truth we have in all of our relationships.
Truth is really what creates intimacy, I think.
No question. Anything else is false.
Yeah. So we love the other side. We love everything that you're doing there, and we've used them every time we've moved a few times, and we've used them, and the people there are amazing. Will you talk about the other side, what that is, what you're doing with it, and yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, for those who are listening who fancy themselves business leaders, I think the Other Side Academy throws down one of the most profound challenges any of us ought to accept. And that is, you know, you and I, when we start a company, we go out and try to hire the best and brightest people and say, maybe if we have the smartest, most interpersonally mature people in the world, we could create a success out of our mission here, out of our enterprise. The Other Side Academy does the exact opposite. So the Other Side Academy right now is 100 people who would otherwise be serving a total of about 700 years in prison. They're living on the corner of 7th East and 1st South in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. And they stay for about 2.5 years minimum at the Other Side Academy and have to find a way to support themselves as a house. They get no government funding. Nobody pays to be there. There's no insurance reimbursement. So they have to generate their own income and find a way to change their lives while they do it. The way they do it is through business. Business is the ultimate therapeutic context, as we all know. The problem is most of our businesses, people don't realize it, and so they're not getting any better. But here's a place where they had to run enterprises to be able to succeed, to be able to bring in income and support the house. And, you know, go figure, the first one they decided to start was a moving company. So God bless the two of you for inviting them into the house. But imagine 5 years ago when the Other Side Academy started, the marketing message goes out to the community here. Hey, we're a bunch of criminals. We'd like to come into your house and move your valuables. We've done it before. We can do it again, right? That was basically the marketing message. And the market was pretty uncomfortable. The idea of felons coming into my house, not so cool. But over time, the reviews started to rack up, and it probably you saw, it is the #1 rated moving company in the entire state. There's now a second campus in Colorado where it's now the #1 moving company in all of the Denver area. These are competitive markets.
Yeah.
How do we do that? So the Other Side Academy is taking the bottom 1%, people with almost no professional skills, horrible character coming in, awful interpersonal maturity, and creating these world-class enterprises. How do you do that? The answer: truth and love. That's it.
Yep.
Truth and love. What the Other Side Academy is about is creating an environment where 10 hours a day we're out working and all of your character weaknesses get exposed. And then for a couple of hours, a couple of nights a week, we sit in a circle and we tell each other what we see in each other as we've been out on that move. Who's lazy? Who's bitchy? Can I say that? Can I say that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah. who's greasy, who's lustful. So you'll sit in a game and somebody will say, you know, we had a really attractive customer the other day and you sat there leering at her. And boy, that will get scorched in that game. You're putting a reputation at risk. You're being the same dirtbag that you were when you walked into this house. You're going to hear it. And you're going to hear it not from some therapist. You're going to hear it from peers who are just like you. Mm-hmm. So when you're sitting in a circle with a community that is going to give you feedback about how you affect them, you have one of two choices. You either change or you leave. And the problem with most of the planet is we're in communities where people don't tell us the truth. They tell it to other people about us, or they sugarcoat it to us, or they just disconnect from us, but they'll never tell us the truth, so we never improve. Moral progress is all about honest feedback from those who experience our behavior. None of us would make progress if it weren't for people telling us, you know, my wife this morning just said, hey, you threw your socks in the dry cleaning bin again. And, you know, I felt the little sting of the pull-up. There's another mistake I made, and I was a little embarrassed about it. But that feedback gives me a chance to say, am I inattentive? Am I lazy? Am I uncaring? Do I not listen to feedback? I get a chance to examine myself. But if you don't live in a feedback or in a community that tells you the truth, then all growth stops. So here's what happens at the Other Side Academy. Literally, you'll have somebody that will arrive day one that's facing 15 years in prison, that's committed violent crimes, been a horrible human being to many people in their lives. They have their own brokenness story too, they all do. But they arrive in this community and literally within weeks you wouldn't recognize them. There's a brightness, there's a light, there's an optimism, there's a feeling of trust and connection. How do you create that connection? Through truth, through crucial conversations. So this is a very special community that has lessons for all of us as business leaders and as human beings.
Yeah, and every by the way, just all of the people that we have encountered from the other side have been outstanding. Just so polite, so driven. Like you said, you can see the light in all of them.
The most negative takeaway I had when we left Salt Lake was that we didn't discover you guys sooner.
Yeah, exactly.
But when I have a question,
Park City now, or
we're in Kanab.
We'd live down in Kanab, so we had to move us from our house to a storage unit because we were going to spend some time traveling around, figuring out where we want to live, and then we landed in Kanab a year later.
Beautiful place.
Oh yeah, we love it. So they just moved us in.
Yep, they drove all our stuff down from Salt Lake.
Oh, wonderful. Well, visit us anytime you're in Salt Lake.
Yeah, the fact that those guys got within 2 hours and 45 minutes of Vegas and still turned around and went north when they were done is a testament to what you're doing.
There you go.
But no, tell us, will you tell our listeners a little bit about, like, they sign a contract and they come and what that looks like from, you know, when they walk in, because it's one of the craziest, isn't it a 2-year contract?
2.5 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the craziest things, it's not crazy, but I think one of the best things about what you're doing is several of the guys that we've met, probably there's usually 4 of them that show up, and 2 to 3 of them have been there for more than 2 years.
Yeah, that is remarkable. I'm glad you got to hear that from them, Pat. And so when the students come, they have to promise to stay the minimum of 2.5 years in order to satisfy their court requirements. Otherwise, they can just go serve their sentence if they'd rather do that. Mm-hmm. And honestly, there's some people that choose to do that. There's some that just say, I don't want to hear about myself. I don't want to sit in a place where people are going to be calling me out on stuff. If I go to prison, I'm left alone in my cell and play cards all day and whatever. And so obviously the Other Side Academy is not the right place for them. But those that stay and that start to become somebody literally that they've never met before, and to be able to look in the mirror for the first time and admire the person that they see looking back, 2/3 of those who make it to that second year ask to stay a third year. Mm-hmm. So there's no court requirement in a year. They're off probation, they're off paper, and yet they still want to stay because they become part of something that helps them admire and love themselves and feel connected to other people. To me, that's just mind-blowing. You know, most programs that the courts send you to, some 30, 60, 90-day program, people just can't wait until day 60 and they want to split right out of there and then go back to the same life they lived before. At the Other Side Academy, we see the opposite happening, and it's so inspiring for me.
Man, I wish we could get that. I hope that thing grows. If there's anything we can ever do to help you grow the other side, because we see what you're doing, and I do believe that people are generally good and they want to do good things. They just don't know how to get out of their own story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend in Salt Lake, or a guy I've known a long time, that owns Wasatch Moving and Storage. And I told him a couple of years or a year and a half ago, the last time we used you guys, that I was like, you ought to be hiring directly out of here if any of these guys want to stay, if you're lucky enough that they want to stay in moving and storage, because it's one of the problems that he has. And then they also turn down a lot of business. And I said, and then you also ought to be referring all your business to these guys. I don't know if he ever did it or not, but
Well, those little conversations between you and him have changed the destiny of our students. We had two that were going to start their workout, their preparation to graduate and move on the other day. And I listened as our executive director, Dave DeRocher, was on the phone making phone calls to different potential employers. And he had to make one phone call. That was it. Because everybody wants to snap up these graduates. And I listened to the conversation, and this tells you what happens to them when they're at the Other Side Academy. Dave's side of the conversation was, do you have any jobs open? And on the other side, the guy said, no, but we'll create one.
Awesome.
And that was it.
that's great.
And again, that tells you, you've seen these 2 and 3 and 4 year graduates, and they have an incredible work ethic. They're capable of interpersonal maturity far beyond what most of us are capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And they bring that to the workplace.
And they have just such a great sense of themselves. They're very like engaging and authentic and
Professional.
massively polite. I mean, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a pleasure to work with all those people.
They're awesome. They're it's funny to look up to, the previous felon that's moving your stuff, and it's outstanding, really.
Yeah.
Really.
One of the interesting anecdotes through this COVID crisis has been, we have two thrift boutiques.
Yeah.
Beautiful Nordstrom quality stores. And when we reopened them, but with provisions for safety, so people had to wash their hands coming in, they need to wear masks, things like that. The whole world is struggling now to figure out, how do you get people to comply with these little requirements? The Other Side Academy doesn't struggle with that. This is how we live. And so when you walk into one of those boutiques, if you don't have a mask on, you're going to hear it from the first student that sees you, the second, the third, the fourth. You're going to get pulled up over and over and over again, and you're going to put that mask on.
Yeah.
You're going to put it on. And I love it because they're comfortable telling the truth. They don't care who it is that walked in. If Governor Herbert, our governor, walked in, they say, Governor Herbert, wear a mask.
Yeah.
And it would be that short, that sweet, that quick.
Well, it's very simple too. There are 100 people that live in a tight knit community, and it's gonna, if one person brings it in, it'll be bad. So
that's exactly right. The risk to our house, if we have one crack in the wall, it's life and death.
Yeah. We told the guys when they were down here, we're like, I think Kane County had a total of 4 cases at the time, and none of them were in Kanab. And I'm like, you guys don't need to wear your mask if you don't want to. And they're like, oh, no, we have to.
No, sir, we're wearing our masks. We did feed them, though. We got them some pizza, and so they took their masks off to eat. But
bless you. Thank you.
We stayed 6 feet away, though.
Yeah, we did. We tried to keep our distance.
Good. Hard to do that.
Truth and love. So what in your marriage and or anyone else's marriage and or relationships can we take from that brutally honest truth and love thing that's happening at the other side? I mean, it's tricky. Most of us has been taught to use the shit sandwich, to deliver bad news, or to try to, say something nice, then say something crappy, then say something nice. And people are still teaching that.
Yeah.
So how do you move from that to truth and love, to truth and love in a relationship?
Yeah. The gold standard for a crucial conversation is 100% honesty. And that's what you ought to measure yourself against every single time. And so at the end of that conversation, if my message was, I'm deeply unhappy in my marriage right now with you, if that's how I'm really feeling right now, then at the end of that conversation, that person needs to know that, not just that you put your socks in the dry cleaning thing again, but that I'm deeply unhappy in our marriage. Mm-hmm. And so the hopeful part of crucial conversations is that with the love piece in place, right, and I'll describe what I mean by that, you can tell the truth. Now, does it work every time? No, of course not. The other person is responsible to be able to absorb that and hear it and to keep themselves in a place where they can hear it. They are responsible for their own safety first and foremost. Your job is to help them, but you're not responsible to make them safe. You can't. So if you show up right and you can help them to create that feeling of safety, there's a far higher chance that they will feel loved and supported. So here's what it looks like. I'll sit in a game at the Other Side Academy, and you got a new student coming in who is out on a move, who is, maybe they're getting the bitch game and the lazy game, and there's a whole bunch of bad feedback that they're getting. And they're getting defensive, and they're riling up, and they're flexing, and they're just about ready to lose it and walk out the door. And all of a sudden, in the midst of this, and I'm telling you, it is a rainstorm of F-bombs at games. I have never heard more F-bombs, and I have never felt more intense love in the same room at the same time than I have at the Other Side Academy. So all the feedback is coming, and then one of the students will stop and say, hey, and let's say Rodney. I'll pick a name for a student. Rodney, we're trying to save your life. We see more in you than you see in you. This is what love looks like. Let us love you right now. And that message comes across so intensely, and you'll see somebody's eyes open wide, and their eyes tear up, and they sit back in their chair, and all the blood drains out of their face, and the defensiveness, they just deflate from all of that need to protect themselves they felt just seconds earlier. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. And that's what it looks like when truth and love coexist. The one doesn't compromise the other. The two have to exist side by side in full measure. And our hope in the Crucial Conversations book is that people learn how to do that, not just at the Other Side Academy, which is a very unique culture, but in the communities that all of us care deeply about.
Yeah. So do you have a hard stop?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, then that's a great place to cut it off then,
Truth
but I
and
have so
love.
many more questions.
Joseph, this has been a blessing for us and for our audience to have you on here. We're honored to be able to speak with you, and thank you so very, very much.
My great pleasure. Thank you for reaching out, and I hope this is just the beginning of our association.
It will be.
Good.